Okay, the purpose of this class today is basically to deal with some concepts about inclusion and some terms about special education needs, right? In a regular teaching context. We will try to avoid from now on the concept of normal setting, right? Instead of that, it could be regular students or regular context as well. Okay. What concepts are we going to deal with? Inclusion, integration. Um, we will see also some of the most typical um, special education needs that we can see in a classroom. We will try to have a look at some tips that can be useful for you, that perhaps you are waiting for, some resources, strategies, and materials that perhaps can help you. Okay? All right, so let's start with these questions. What is inclusion? I think that most of you know what it is. Most of you are trying to grasp the main meaning of this term. Okay. Um, what do you know about SEN? It's a question that I would like you to answer to yourself. What do you know? What regular SEN students do you have in your classrooms? And what do you think about inclusion? Is it the same inclusion as integration? In Chile, at least, we have these two terms. It's a dichotomy that we have, integration versus inclusion. We try to work for inclusion instead of integration. Why? Because integration is to have the student in the classroom, but at some point the student is left aside. Sometimes we have students who are exempted. Sometimes the students are taken away from a classroom, especially in English, and they are taken away from the classroom, and other professionals work with the student about other more important subjects such as language or math. At least that is what happens in our country, in Chile. But what we need to do is to work for inclusion. And inclusion is to have the student in the classroom and to provide a variety of strategies for all the students, not only for the one who has ADHD or autism or Down syndrome, is to work with strategies in order to involve all my students in my class. So that is a huge difference between these two terms, right? So yes, SEN is an acronym that stands for Special Education Needs and Disability. Some people don't like the term disability, but I must say that disability is used worldwide, is a useful term. It doesn't have a negative connotation. Actually, what it is, disability, the meaning it has is to promote other abilities. So we need to change this negative connotation that this term sometimes has. All right. So what this concept really means is, well, it is a term that involves different abilities, right? There are certain areas that are usually involved, such as communication, movement, self-care, decision-making, among others. We have to remember that years ago, we had special education as something separate from the regular schools. And okay, I think that someone has the microphone on, right? Okay, thank you. So what I was, I was saying, special needs comes from, of course, the term comes from special education. Special education uh, started centuries ago in Europe. Um, and years ago, every single learner that who had special abilities or certain disabilities was expected to go to these special schools. However, thanks God, now we have the idea of including everyone in the same classroom. It's not easy. It won't be easy, right? Why? Because there are certain special needs that are that demand more efforts from the teachers, the professionals, from everyone. There are some special needs that are more demanding. Therefore, we can say that there are certain individuals that may suffer in a more severe degree these disorders or conditions. So that's why we need to be trained on that. Fortunately, in many institutions here in our country, now the students are receiving some ideas about the strategies that they could implement at the moment of working with students with special needs. Not all the programs have these courses, but at least we are working on that. And there are many institutions here in our country, in Chile at least, that are working on this. And if for any reason you didn't receive any sort of training on this, well, we are teachers, we are always trying to discover and to find out information, right? So that's part of our job. And what I was saying before, disability sometimes has this negative meaning behind the term, especially in our country. I've talked to many parents, to many people who don't like the term disability, but it has a positive view, a positive perspective, especially when it presents you different alternatives and opportunities. There are areas that are affected, of course, physical areas, sensory areas, cognitive areas that are affected by these disabilities. The ones that are more severe, sometimes they involve more than one area only. Okay. When I mentioned the idea of talking to parents, is basically because I am working with this because my daughter is in the autistic spectrum disorder. So that's the reason I started working with this, right? Because it was a challenge for me to have a daughter with these necessities, and I was a teacher, so I had to, and I'm grateful for doing this because I've learned a lot, and I think that I've supported not only future teachers of English but also parents. Sometimes parents are quite alone working with this and going against the river, let's say. What are the regular types of special education needs? Well, in Chile at least, we have a division between the ones that are of a permanent kind and the ones that are of a more transitory nature. That is to say, the ones that belong to a permanent kind, the individuals are born with this condition and they die with the condition. And it doesn't mean that they are not going, they won't be able to overcome certain barriers. No, they will, but it's more difficult for them, all right? And when we talk about this transitory nature, it means that it's a bit easier, right, to overcome certain problems and barriers. So Um, for example, in the States, the disorder, the ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that disorder is considered as something permanent. However, here in our country, it is transitory, right? But well, at the end, what we have to do is to provide strategies not only to the learner but also to the teacher in order to deal with these students. Down syndrome, right? Autism, PDD, that stands for one. The previous term for that was in Spanish was TGD, which stands for Trastorno Generalizado del Desarrollo. That was the name in Spanish. But now we have PDD, right? We also have students who suffer from DLD, which is developmental language disorder, among others. It's not quite common to see students in regular context or in regular classrooms who suffer, for example, from neurological disabilities. That's more difficult to see in our countries. However, in other contexts, it is common to see that. For example, in the States, you can have one classroom with one student who suffers from neurological disorder or condition with regular students. This is more difficult to see in Chile, at least. So these are the areas that I was mentioning before that are regularly involved in the problems that these students normally have to face. Problems with communication, verbal communication or oral communication, and also, of course, written communication too. Interaction with peers, interaction with adults, interaction in general, right? That is also connected with number 3, social and emotional problems, right? Due to the fact that sometimes students are not able to interact properly, or they are also rejected by their peers. So that's why they also are affected in the emotional area, in social area, right? Because it's difficult for them to be accepted by their peers. Cognition and learning as well, right? Most of these problems suffer problems, cognitive problems, right? And learning problems too. And physical disorders and also sensory disorders too are also present at some points in some of these special education needs that we are going to see today. Okay. All right. So again, if you have any questions, you can type your question there and someone will be taking notes of your questions. Well, if you have been teaching in schools, I'm pretty sure that you know about what you have here. This slide says children with special education needs may need extra help, right? And sometimes we don't have too much time to devote individually in every single student we have in our classrooms. Therefore, these students sometimes are left aside a bit. So they do struggle with assignments or tasks they have to carry out in the classrooms during classwork or outside. They do struggle with problems or with the development of the skills. Remember that when we teach English to our students, we try to develop the 4 skills, and they do struggle a lot with the development of reading, concentration, right? To express themselves. If it's difficult for them to express in the student's mother tongue, imagine how difficult it could be to express in a foreign language. Sometimes they struggle with certain sounds in Spanish, so, or in the student's mother tongue, so it will be more difficult when they try to develop a foreign language or second language. What I mentioned before about making friends and interaction, their own organization, I mean, it's difficult for them sometimes to establish certain sequence or organization at the moment of working in the school, in the class, and of course that also happens at home. Therefore, sometimes when we start working with these students that who suffer a lot from these problems, we expect a formal diagnosis. In our country, we have a program which is the regular PA program that at least works in the public setting. PA programs are Programas de Integración Escolar. They are devoted to work with certain accommodations and adaptations for students who suffer these disorders. Until last year, at least, they usually worked only with English and, with Spanish, yeah, and mathematics. No, English, no. Therefore, we, teachers of English, were always left aside and we didn't receive any sort of support except some general guidelines. Sometimes we know that there are 5 students with a clear diagnosis, but we know that there are 10. Because of my experience, I mean, I know that this student has something. We don't know what it is, right? We don't know what it is. But I know that he suffers from certain disorders. What to do? Because the one student who has special needs should receive support from different areas. Family, professionals in general, and the school, right? So we try to cover one area. But if we don't have a formal diagnosis, we should focus on other questions instead of the formal piece of paper, right? We should focus on the way to help, to support the learners in order to achieve the objectives I'm expecting, or at least the ones that I have established according to the curriculum. So I should reflect on that. Of course, we need to work with the program or the group of professionals that are in charge of working with SEN students in the school. If there isn't any formal PA program or integration program, as you may call it in your country, but we need to be aware of that. We need to ask questions. All right, what am I going to do with this student in the classroom, right? I've worked with students who develop their practicum periods, their internship in the schools for many years. And I have heard many times the following: no, I can't work with this student, so leave him aside, leave her aside. No, he's exempted, don't worry. No, that's the way he is, that's the way she is, don't worry. He never works. No. He doesn't receive any mark. No, he's not in English. The students are there. So we should be worried about. I mean, those students, one day someone said, don't worry, you're not going to be evaluated in English, so you don't need to work. And that's a cycle. So we need to engage the students. We need to work with the students. We need to enchant the students, right? These special education needs students, because they are other type of students only. Now we are going to deal with certain disorders, To be precise, we're going to see certain characteristics about dyslexia, dysgraphia. We will see ADHD, OTD, autism, among others, right? Learning disorders. All right, learning disorders, here we have the 4 areas are involved. So we teachers of English who try always to, we focus our attention on the development of these skills, we may say that it is a challenge. It is a challenge, definitely. The students struggle a lot with reading comprehension, with problems of writing, math, that perhaps you may say, okay, math is not in my class, but organization is part of the mathematics, and of course language, oral and written language. Okay, so what are we going to see here? Let's start with dyslexia. Well, what is dyslexia? Well, dyslexia is a disorder that affects a person, an individual. I always use the term individual due to the fact that sometimes we think that these special needs may affect only kids or children, but no, they affect the person. It can be a young person, it can be a child, it can be an adult, right? So it affects everybody. The problems that we see with dyslexia is that sometimes the students may confuse certain symbols, right? Instead of typing a B, they will type a P or a D. Instead of pronouncing a P, since they see a different symbol, they read something different. Therefore, something that you don't have to do immediately if you know that you have a dyslexic student in your class. Do not ask them to read aloud. No. In first place, don't do that. It will be very difficult for them to read aloud because they feel embarrassed. Okay, so don't do that. I'm going to show to you a sample of one kid who suffers from dyslexia. As you can notice in this slide, there are, well, many problems, not only dyslexia. We could also say that this student also suffers from dysgraphia, which is a problem of writing or typing. There is here the student confuses the sound, right? The symbol B instead of D. But today there is an extra space at the same time. Here there is an extra space, and here there isn't. And there isn't any space. Here there is also the presence of this confusion, right? And look, this is the sound, the end, right? So that's why instead of typing the end, he wrote down the end. So this is an example. And if you are going to evaluate writing, what are you going to do with this? Right? Are you going to discount spelling here? If you know that your student suffers from dyslexia, are you going to penalize these mistakes? these problems? Well, that is a question that we need to bear in mind when we have students who suffer from this condition. Here I have another task for you. I would like you to guess, what do you see here? These are some words that came from a dictation. A teacher of English dictated some words, and the students had to take notes. Typical dictation that we have, that we may use in our classrooms, and the students had to take notes. And this is what the student did. I don't know if you can guess what you have here, but it would be difficult. What if you have to assess this, right? Spelling, writing. Okay, so these were the words. And look at number 3 here. The mirror writing. The mirror writing thing is that the student writes from the right to the left, and he or she inverts the symbols. This is it is in everyone here, right? He started the other way around. He inverted the symbols. So what to do? Well, there are certain tips that we can take into account at the moment of working with students who suffer from dyslexia. In the first place, what we should consider is the use of multisensory approaches. Multisensory approaches are very easy to consider in the classroom. VAK, for example. VAK is the typical visual, auditory, and kinesthetic approach that we can use there. The approach that in our country we have to support students with who suffer special education needs is UDL, Universal Design for Learning, or DUA. That's the acronym in Spanish. But basically, that approach works with the idea of working with the senses in general, right? Taking into account the learner's learning skills, right? The learning styles. So you need to bear in mind the best way a student can learn. And when you're going to work with a text, well, try to prepare the learner for what comes about the text. Try to provide accessible means. If you have the possibility to allow the student to use, I don't know, technological devices in the classroom, be flexible on that. Be flexible with that. It will be very useful and supportive for the learners, right? Try to help the students, the learners, to organize the way they are going to write the text, or the way they are going to read the text as well, to take notes, to highlight, etc. So we can support on that. Okay, something related to dyslexia is dysgraphia. I don't know if you have heard about dysgraphia, but dysgraphia is, to be very precise, is just the problems the students have when they write, when they write the text down. It's difficult for them to grip a pen correctly. It is difficult for them to write correctly. There is a problems with space, right? There is a problem with, sometimes vision is also present there. Some problems with that they are not able to focus correctly. So that's why they write with many difficulties. So there is a problem with the space of the piece of paper, the organization of ideas. Sometimes they start writing at one point and they finish somewhere else, right? Not only on the board. That's a typical problem that perhaps you, even you as a teacher, you may have, that you start writing at one point and then you finish in a different point, right? But when you write over a piece of paper regularly, you should follow a line. Well, these students do not respect lines, they do not respect space. Sometimes everything is like cumulative writing. So it's very difficult to guess, to read, to understand the meaning. It's quite difficult to read the message. This is basically writing, okay? Sometimes the students have different types of, they mix uppercase, that is to say capitalization, with lowercase. They start with a huge font size and then they change to a smaller one. They do not finish some words, or they just start one word and they don't finish the word. They take longer to type a very short passage, and it's not because they are perfectionists. No, it's difficult for them. What to do then? Well, we have to focus first. In first place, if our student takes the pen, if the gripping is correct, it is important, right? Because this part should provide a certain support for the learner who's writing over a piece of paper. So they should have certain support here. If a student, for example, takes a pen this way, because there are some students who start typing this way, there isn't too much mobility. Therefore, it's important to teach them how to grip a pen. It can be this way, which is the best one, or this way, but the point is to provide certain support and mobility to the wrist and also to the fingers. So we can work on very small details in order to help these students. It's not that they are lazy, all right? So pay attention to that. When we use incorrect words in the classroom, sometimes we don't know that we are not helping the students. This is an example of dysgraphia. I would like you to try to guess the message behind this text. I don't know if you're able to understand the text. Okay, but it is difficult, right? It is quite difficult. And perhaps you, as a teacher of English, you are going to receive in one moment a student with dysgraphia, and he or she will write something like this. I remember that at the university some years ago, I was working with some students. Imagine, 19 years old, 20 years old, my students. And I remember that I had one student and I had to ask him to rewrite certain sentences. And because at that point, I didn't know that he had certain difficulties. And he gave me exactly the same. It wasn't different. And then I understood that it was a problem related to dysgraphia. So I tried to support him with other means. I allow him to use computer, for example, right? So this is the message behind this graphic writing. So, of course, the problem is not only for the student, it's also for you, because you need to read, you need to understand the message, you need to to understand what the text is about. So if you are asking the students to work with a writing activity and he or she writes this way, so it's difficult. What to do? There are certain strategies that we can take, that we can consider. What I mentioned before, the position and posture when you ask the students to write. Again, the multisensory approach. We are going to watch a very short video now about dysgraphia. So I would like you to pay attention to these.
If a student has difficulty writing, it may be a sign of dysgraphia. Compared to other learning disabilities like dyslexia and ADHD, dysgraphia is not well understood. There's just not a lot of research yet. But we do know that for children who have dysgraphia, it can be a serious obstacle to academic success. According to the National Center for Learning Disabilities, dysgraphia can impair a person's ability to write, spell, and put thoughts down on paper. The condition may be characterized by strong thinking skills but weak writing skills. And there are signs you should look out for: difficulty gripping a pencil, slow, labored writing, poor spelling, irregular letter sizes and shapes, inconsistent spacing, and a mix of upper and lowercase letters. It's easy to forget about dysgraphia and dismiss poor handwriting as sloppy or lazy, but that's a real problem. Students with dysgraphia may already suffer from low self-esteem, high stress levels, and difficulty forming friendships. So what should teachers do? First and foremost, be supportive so that students are encouraged to work on their handwriting. Teachers can also provide large pencils or pencils with specialized grips, let kids use tape recorders, speech-to-text software, or computer keyboards to capture their thinking, give additional time for writing assignments and tests, consider assigning alternatives to writing such as oral reports, and help students practice motor skills by playing with clay, for example, or tracing letters.
I think that you can take into account some of these strategies here. So for a student who suffers from dyslexia, perhaps to use certain, as the ones who suffer from dysgraphia, to use, for example, oral presentations, the creation of posters. So a variety of strategies, not the regular writing or reading comprehension, perhaps to think of other strategies as well. Okay. So what are language disorders? Here now we are going to see with to work with something that is very common in the classrooms. The students who suffer or who show certain problems with speech, certain sounds that sometimes are not correctly addressed or produced. These disorders can be shown into two ways: what the students receive and how they decode the message, and how they express the message, and the mixture of these two. I mean, it can be that the student receives the message and he has a problem of expressing only, or only in the reception, but he expresses perfectly well, but there isn't a clear connection between what he or she expresses and what he receives, and the mixture of these two, which is a little bit worse, right? This is called as DLD. Previously, this term was icon as was coined, as a specific language impairment. In Spanish, the term was trastorno del lenguaje, trastorno de desarrollo del lenguaje. That's the name now that we have. And of course, since we expect the students to produce a foreign language, we know that there are certain sounds that are not present in Spanish. Therefore, we need to be flexible on that. I remember that as a teacher of English, I've taught, I mean, for many years, and sometimes students struggle a lot with certain sounds because those sounds are not present in Spanish. So be flexible on that. And it's not only the sound, it's also the way they pronounce. I mean, the the, the, the phonological chamber they have, sometimes they do have certain physical impairment, so it will be more difficult to produce certain sounds, and that is also connected with emotions. They tend to be shy, they don't want to express, they don't want to talk, they don't want to pronounce any sound in English. And we also have the environment where their peers make fun of them, right? They laugh at someone who's speaking or who's talking and with certain difficulties. So all these factors affect a lot, not only the self-esteem of the individual, but also the willing to produce and participate in the class of English. Perhaps you have noticed that these students are very good at writing, and they use the rules, they put into practice what you have been teaching, but they don't want to produce. It may be because of these disorders, right? And one way to support students with this disorder is to work, for example, with very clear and specific instructions, to ask them to repeat. Some teachers don't like too much repetition or drilling, and it can be boring if you just ask them to repeat. Like, you say one word and they repeat. It's not only that, there are different types of drilling where the students have to repeat only the word in isolation. Then when the students can use the word into a context, right? So, or when they can create their own use of the word. So allow them and encourage the students to work with repetition. When you work with very little kids or very young learners, nursery rhymes are very useful as well. So try to keep them engaged. And there is also one very interesting way to work with these students. They to help them to organize ideas is very useful for students who suffer from dyslexia, dysgraphia, and also DLD. The link, the website you see here, kaggle.it, is one website that will help you to diagram. Okay, it's a website. It's a free website. You have to create just one account. It is for free, and in there you can create mind maps and concept maps too. So it would be very interesting for students who struggle with these disorders to organize their ideas. And they can use ICTs. So if you have the time, try to explore this website, and also try to invite your students to use this website, which will be very useful. I'm pretty sure about it, because they can organize ideas. They can they won't struggle with pronunciation, for example, since they will be working with writing basically. Another problem that you may see in the classrooms is the stuttering. And stuttering is quite difficult because it is connected with emotions. There are many researchers that establish that stuttering comes from an emotional problem, an emotional disorder, and is reflected into this moment of stuttering, right? When the student gets stuck into one sound or word, and he or she cannot go on. with the idea. So he gets on, and he or she is not able to continue, and it takes too much time. The video there that I'm not going to project due to time issues shows many examples of students who struggle a lot with stuttering, and some ways to support the students who stutter in a classroom is basically to in first place is just to involve all the classmates, all the students in this emotional contention, let's say. If the student knows that someone is going to laugh at him or her, they are going to stutter. So when you say, for example, okay, just relax, that is a stress. That's a stress for the one who stutters. So do not tell them, okay, just relax. No, because that's more pressure. That's more pressure for the student who suffers from that. All right. So avoid finishing ideas of these students. Just give them time. Give them time to continue to work, to express. If you know that one question will take 10 seconds with one student, and you ask another student who stutters, and you know that it takes 1 minute, okay, don't push him, don't push her, right? Okay, hurry up, no, because that's pressure. So be careful with that. So talk about the problem with the student, but also with the rest of the students in the classroom. All right. In order to respect the time too. The most typical special education needs that we normally see in the classrooms are basically two: ADHD and also autism. So now we are going to devote some time on these two very important special education needs that I'm pretty sure you have seen in your classroom. ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is very frequent, and you can perhaps immediately notice when someone suffers from this disorder. Autism nowadays is quite common as well in the classrooms. So the acronym for that is ASD. So it's important to bear in mind that acronym in English. In Spanish it is TEA, TEA, trastorno del espectro autista. The problem with these individuals is that they struggle a lot with self-regulation. So it's very difficult for them to control themselves. So that's one skill that they need to develop, not only at home but also in the class, and you will be very useful there. Right? If you pay attention to the words that now you have on the screen, like troublemakers, messy, distracted, undisciplined, lazy, these are regular adjectives that I have heard when someone is going to describe a student. And the point is that they are not lazy, they are not messy. No, they do have a problem. The problem is the disorder related with attention. There is a combination also that sometimes the students also suffer from hyperactivity, which makes everything a little bit worse, let's say, because attention is one thing and hyperactivity is a different one, right? Like the dog that you can see there in the GIF picture. So the 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 man, the old man, is talking to his pet, but then the dog pays attention to something else, and his attention moves towards the squirrel. And that happens very frequently in the classrooms with students who suffer from ADHD. They struggle with problems with inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. There are three types, but the three types share some features that are right here, such as problems with their temper, right? They do not accept frustration, they struggle a lot, they immediately explode, right? Because the levels of tolerance they have are quite low. Unfortunately, the problems these students have can be reflected by the rejection of their own peers. So it is also a problem, a social problem for the individual, because he's not accepted by his or her peers in the classroom. So it's difficult when you ask the students, okay, today we're going to work with group work, and no one wants to work with X student because he is hyperactive or he suffers from attention deficit disorder, and no one wants to work with him or her. So again, this rejection leads the individual to have poor self-esteem, and they don't want to work in your classes, or etc. And that is also connected to something that we are going to see immediately after this, which is ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, which is connected to this as well. So what to do? Well, in first place, we need to ask certain questions about what sort of support we should provide to these students, how to incorporate, how to involve the students in our practices. For example, what strategies should I consider at the moment of working with reading comprehension? Because reading comprehension is quite difficult for them. Reading comprehension, what you're doing is to ask the students to read, let's say 10 lines, and all of a sudden they, after the first 5 words, they move somewhere, and you lose them. So the same happens when you give too long pieces of instruction in a test, or in an exercise, in a handout, or even verbal instructions. When you give too many words, they are going to grasp the first 3 or 5 ideas, and after that, they are going to move somewhere else. So be precise, concise with the language, simplify the language as well, right? Use, if you can, try to use cognates. Of course, do not use false cognates, but use the cognates that we can take advantage of when you type. Complete, similar to completar, instead of fill in, right? So you can say complete. If you're going to give oral instructions, use a lot of gestures, a lot of body language, in order to invite the student to comprehension, to comprehend what your message. All right, if you give 2 very long instructions and then you translate into Spanish, well, it won't work. But if you use only English, it won't work either, because they are not going to pay attention to the complete instruction. So short instructions, short pieces of information. Consider the environment, such as where they are located, if they are at the end. Perhaps they also have problems of hearing well, or they do not see correctly as well. So, and also try to promote a creative environment where they can do many things, many activities, not only writing. So move your transitions from one activity to another, clear transitions, right? So if you're going to do this activity, immediately, okay, finish the activity, transition, and then a new activity. but something appealing and engaging, right? And this is what I was telling you before. This ODD problem is also connected with ADHD. ODD is oppositional defiant disorder, right? And here we have students who reject working. They do not want to work with you and with any other teacher. They don't want to receive support, help. They don't want to talk to anyone. They are always under a bad mood. So we need to pay attention to certain details, right? So try to be clear on certain previous, perhaps the previous environment or factors that we may have. Also establish expectations. Do not think that because of he or she suffers from this disorder, they are not going to be able to achieve your objectives. Provide concrete, positive reinforcement. If you deal with very little, with very young learners, stickers or even the stamps that you can have, that you can use. And also warn the students about consequences. If you do this, because that affects the life of everyone, right? I mean, if you do this is the consequence. So let them know that there will be consequences if, right, in these cases, and not to that student, to the entire class. So all the complete class is aware of it, not only the ex-student who suffers from ODD. These warnings are for the complete course. So consider to have fun in the class, to laugh, allow them to play, right? When I say laugh, if you are a serious teacher, that can be fine, but you can also share certain, videos, or perhaps to allow them to work with comics, so they can have fun when they work. They will feel motivated and engaged as well, right? Give them variety of opportunities so they can choose. UDL is one approach that also allows you to provide these different opportunities when you teach them and also when you assess the students. So if you have the chance, try to have a look at UDL approach as well. Now we are going to move to the last special education need, which is autism. And autism is a disorder according to the DSM-5. It is a developmental disorder, right? And some years ago, the definition came from a triad, the Laura Wing triad, elaborated a sort of triangle that explained the areas affected in autism. Now the DSM-5 has changed that a little bit, but basically it is the same. We have two important areas that are affected in this disorder. We have social communication, social and communication and interaction, and also problems, cognitive problems connected to concrete language and interpretation, concrete interpretation as well, problems with imagination as well. It's very difficult for them to understand the way as someone else sees something. Empathy is something very difficult for them to develop, and that is connected to the theory of mind. All right, the theory of mind explains why ASD individuals struggle a lot to develop empathy, because they are not able to see as someone else sees something, right? In general, in life, it's quite difficult. They are quite concrete, and they are not abstract at all. They are concrete. So that's why we cannot use, for example, sarcasm or we cannot, if we use intonation, and we teachers always use in a class, they are not going to understand the intonation as a different message. If I say, if I say, for example, yeah, I didn't mean yes, I mean, right? I mean, my face expresses something. They are not able sometimes at some points to understand the message behind a face or behind a sound, because they are concrete. So it's quite difficult to make them understand that. So we need to bear in mind that if I mean A, it is A, and not to expect the students to understand the message behind my text. So that's why language is one of the most difficult areas for autistic individuals to develop, because they struggle a lot with metaphor, with figurative language. It's quite difficult for them to understand that. Language is the first barrier for them. And there are others, of course. We are going to watch a video about this idea of autism.
We are all different, and that's wonderful. Some differences are easy to see. Height, hairstyle, gender, eye color, and so on. Other differences can't be seen. Our favorite foods, fears, or special skills. Interestingly, the way we see the world is also different. For instance, what do you see in this drawing? Most people see a duck, but some of you might have seen a rabbit. Whichever you saw, you are correct. This is just a trick drawing to show you that all brains work differently. The brain is your body's computer. It works differently for all of us and controls how you learn. That's why we are all good at different things. How you feel, which is why we all feel different emotions. And how you communicate. Sometimes the brain is connected in such a way it affects senses and how we perceive and read situations and interactions. This is known as autism. Many people have autism, so it's likely you already know someone who is autistic. And for this reason, it's useful to know a little bit about autism. The special wiring inside an autistic brain can sometimes make the person good at tasks we may find difficult, such as mathematics, drawing, or music. It can also do the opposite, and activities we find too easy are incredibly difficult to them, such as making friends. The senses constantly send information to your brain about your surroundings and other people. However, when a person's brain and its senses don't communicate well, the brain can become overwhelmed and confused, affecting how they see the world. Picture yourself walking down the street. This is how an autistic brain may experience the same walk. Scary, isn't it? Sadly, in many cases, the person can't say out loud how they feel. So even though there's chaos going on in their heads, they seem okay on the outside, unable to ask for help. We all develop behaviors to help us feel calm in uncomfortable situations. We may look away, hug ourselves, chew our fingernails, fidget, bite our lips, and so on. Equally, autistic people develop behaviors that help them cope with these intense moments. These actions may seem unusual, but they're just their way to feel calm. When they happen, it means they are having a hard time. The kind thing to do is not to give them an even harder time by getting cross, ignoring them, or mocking them. Remember, Just because a PlayStation can't read an Xbox game, it doesn't mean it's broken. People with autism need friends who are willing to take the time to know them. With good communication and plenty of patience, everyone would be better off. People with autism are not ill or broken. They simply have a unique view of the world. And with a little support from their friends, they might just be able to share that view with us. Autism can make amazing things happen.
Autism really is. And what we can add to this video is basically that the distribution of the individuals into 3 groups. The first group, as you can see here, is about the students that will regularly be included in a regular setting or school setting. They will need certain support, but it's not that much. They struggle with social interaction, right, to start conversation, but they are regularly included in the class, in the schools in general. They do need support. But in this group, we can also have the typical Asperger students. It's important to know that Asperger is part of ASD, all right? It's not a different one. The DSM-5, which is an international manual that provides the definitions for different disorders and conditions, established ASD as a big name, and inside this big name, which is autism spectrum disorder, we have Asperger, all right, as part of it. So Asperger is not something different. So if we say, oh, he's Asperger, no, he's ASD, or the student is ASD, because he or she suffers from this disorder. The second level is that they do need some more support, all right? Some of these students can also be found in the schools, all right? But the problem is with language, they do have repetitive behavior, right? The interests are very restricted. So for example, if you have one student who likes only Pikachu, and it's just Pikachu and everything is Pikachu, use Pikachu in your evaluations. Use Pikachu in the activities, all right? Because you know that in that way, that student will get engaged. And the last one, in the level number 3, we will find students that perhaps are nonverbal, or the students that struggle a lot more. They are more severe in general terms. It will be more difficult to find students from this level in regular classrooms. What we normally see with these individuals is social problems of interaction and communication. We also see meltdowns that are a huge problem in the classrooms because they see as something violent towards the rest, and it's just an expression of the emotions. Why? Because the problem in the ASD individual's brain is that they release a lot of cortisol. When you release cortisol, when you are under stress, okay, the problem with autism is that they release cortisol constantly. Everything triggers the release of cortisol. So that's why every single minimal thing can trigger one meltdown, right? Because the problem of the cortisol in their neurons. And you can also see flapping hands, right? So this is just an expression of, this is just a release of emotions. Sometimes the students are not able to verbalize words and they flap their hands. So just let them be. Pay attention to the light, to the sound, something that is unfamiliar, textures, right? Sometimes they do not stand eye contact. So, and do not tell the students, look at me when I am talking to you, right? Because they are not going to stand that pressure. That's pressure for them. All right. If you go too fast, your language has to be also not only simplified, but also concrete and specific. Among others, my daughter who suffers from ASD, if I talk too loud, she immediately gets stressed because she thinks that I am yelling at her. So, and it's not only with me, of course, it's everything. Actually, she loves to go to concerts. She's 13, but she can't stand the noise. So they call me there. What to do? Well, anticipation is key. Anticipation allows them to be in a more comfortable environment. They feel secure. So when you anticipate a change, they feel a lot more secure. They something that also stressed them, the ASD students, is when, for example, you say, all right, today we are going to work with our book, go to page 13. And the ASD, and then we will see that later. That is just stress and stress and stress. For this particular student, perhaps what you can do is just to use a diagram. Number one, we are going to work with page number 13. Number two, we will work in the creation of a text in groups. And number three, another task. So you tell him or her what the procedure will be, right? So you anticipate the changes. When you are in a class and let's say the class, for example, was expected to have music, and the teacher is sick, so he is not coming, and all right, you're not going to have music, now you will have math. Why? No, because the teacher is sick. Okay, that can be, but if you have a student with ASD, you have to tell them in advance that there will be a change. Okay, that's anticipation. You must avoid sarcasm or irony because they will not understand, unless you want to make fun of the student, right? That I suppose that you won't. Do not use this double meaning language. Avoid that. Be concrete and specific. For example, if you want to say, okay, I've got my eye on you, they will understand like the picture you see here because they are concrete. If you say A, they understand A. Okay, so be careful with metaphors, with figurative language, the jokes, the same thing. They will learn how to, okay? I mean, ASD individuals, when they are trained on that, they will understand somehow, but they need to be trained on that. Okay, they will get used to one intonation, and they will know that the intonation means something different, not exactly the meaning. Actually, they will tell you, you know, something different, right? And yes, they understand. Perhaps they don't understand the message, but they know that there is something behind your words. But that's only training. At the beginning, they won't understand that. Okay? So anticipation, show schedules. Okay? So organization, because they need this security, this to feel secure in this environment, that this is the schedule. Use pictograms as well. Pictograms help a lot. Sometimes the students do not have the language in their mother tongue, so pictograms can help a lot. So when you develop a task or a test, use icons as well. Reading, writing, not only body language, actually gestures for them is nothing because they are not able to read your face. So, but a pictogram will help a lot. So some of the, here I had a video about certain tips but I'm not going to show that due to the time, since I have to answer some questions as well that some of you have been asking. What to do? Well, in general, try to take advantage of approaches such as TPR, collaborative work, UDL. In first place, simplify your language. Try to take advantage of ICTs as well if you can. Now that we are with the coronavirus issue, working with online classes, try to take advantage of these ICTs, devices, and also online resources. Of course, every time that your students have access to that as well. And something else, group work, but also talk to the rest of the students in order to make inclusion possible. Certain strategies deal with physical movement and also the language, friendly and simple language as well. Try to consider also multisensory approaches as the one that I mentioned at the beginning, right? Where you provide a diversity of means and opportunities for the learner to develop one or more skills in general. Be flexible, develop your comprehension as well, okay? And yeah, sometimes we need to change even the language we regularly use in the classrooms. Here you have many tips that perhaps you can consider at the moment of working with that. And also try to consider the routine as something positive. Use yourself as a model of inclusion to provide not only one opportunity, perhaps more than one opportunity. If you're going to expect all the students to write a text, okay, perhaps, I don't know, 80% of my students will be able to write that, but there will be some students that are not going to make it. So why not to give them a different opportunity? Why not to give all the class different options, okay? The ones who want to write here, the ones who want to create a poster with writing here, the ones to develop, I don't know, a dialogue here, but dramatization, yeah, it can be a role play activity, but they have to write anyways. So you can provide different alternatives. Perhaps it will take you a little bit more time, but what you are going to do at the end is to include and promote and foster inclusion in your classrooms and in your classes as well. To be creative. Sometimes we are quite tired, but thanks God now we have internet and it gives us tons of resources. So it is us only, the ones who have to think a little bit more of working with creativity, and at the same time allow your students to be creative. All right, so why not, for example, to allow your students to change a story, to change the characters, to change the end of a story, to dramatize the story, to create, I don't know, for example, a poster for the story. Okay, so you can make it. And we are going to work with collaborative work, definitely. So I think that this is the end of the presentation. I hope that all what I've mentioned to you could help you at least a little. Thank you for your attention. And now I'm going to give the time to Abigail. I don't know if you want to ask the questions, Abby, or if you want me to try to answer the questions immediately.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you have the questions in hand. So I don't know if you want me to show the questions at the same time that you are answering.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But I think that I'm not sure that I can.
Okay, I have to stop the sharing.
Yes,
Let
you
me
have to
do
stop
this.
sharing.
Okay.
So we are going to show the questions. Thank you for asking. Okay, so let me share.
All right. Okay. I have these questions here. I will try to give answers in general to this. Um, some of these questions are related to dyslexia, to some other permanent conditions. Well, it will depend on the country where you are, right? We know that sometimes the laws that we have in our country are the ones that rule the way we can work in the classrooms or in the schools. If, for example, if you don't have any sort of SEN program, uh, my piece of advice would be that you may work with the professionals that work with the student right there. I mean, parents are the first source for you to know about certain details about the kid or the person. They are the ones who will tell you how they behave, what they do, what you can expect in certain under certain conditions. Therefore, talk to them first. Try to be in contact with the professionals who work with the student. So you can also get information. They can also help you with certain strategies to develop, let's say, reading or writing or speaking. Or if you want to work with behavior only in the classroom, they can also help you. I mean, do not work alone if you don't have a SEN program in your school. So that's the first source, all right? There are certain difficulties such as epilepsy or blind or deaf students. In that case, well, for deaf students, of course, the school should allow you, should give you the opportunity to be trained on sign language. Remember that sign language is different from one country to another. We have Chilean sign language, we have Argentinian sign language, and so on and so forth. Once I was talking to one teacher who has certain hearing difficulties. She used sign language for many years, and the first piece of advice is to establish communication. Okay, that's the first thing. To be able to establish communication, and for that you should use the, the student's mother tongue or the student's mother sign language, and then to start integrating little by little different symbols or signs in English. In the case of diagnosis, well, we, as I mentioned before, we have the possibility to receive professional diagnosis at the beginning, or, for example, dyslexia or dysgraphia are not clearly seen until they go to school. So teachers normally are the ones who immediately detect the problem, because they discover these problems when they start writing or reading. Therefore, when you start working with the development of those skills is the moment when you notice that. And of course, parents are not aware of it. And we also have cases when parents reject the possibility. No, you're wrong. No. And that's the negation, let's say, right? But anyways, if the parents do not take the kid to professionals, you can work at school. You can implement certain strategies in order to support the kid as well. But of course, that's not the replacement for what parents should do, right? But that's only in the case we don't have a clear diagnosis at the beginning. And yes, teachers sometimes are the first the first ones to see something. We are not going to diagnose anything. We are just going to detect certain features or characteristics, even with autism. All right, when you work with very young learners, you can also see certain features, even though they could be diagnosed at the age of 2, perhaps a little bit, or around 2 years old, more or less. But sometimes teachers are the ones who can see certain features or characteristics about conditions or disorders. And yeah, I don't know what else I could say. Yeah, epilepsy. I always give I talk about one case that I had when I was a student at the university. I didn't know about one student there, and he suffered a crisis there, and it was terrible because we didn't know what to do. So my suggestion is, if you know about the student who has this problem, okay, it is the school, the one which should be in charge of taking into consideration what protocol to follow, what procedure to follow, because it is difficult, right? It is a physical problem, and they can be injured at the end, right? At the end of a crisis, if we don't know what to do. I don't know if I answer in general. If you can use symbols, yes, sure. I mean, you can use symbols to support the task that you want to use in your classes. You can use that can be, for example, for not only for ASD students, but also for students who suffer from dyslexia or even dysgraphia. Try to take into account the restricted interest they have. If they are focused or they are obsessed with Legos, all right, allow them to play with Legos in your classrooms, but you have to give a goal, an objective to that restricted interest. All right? Okay, I think that I answered most of the questions in general, and I really appreciate your time and your interest on this. So thank you. Thank you, Abby, as well, for the opportunity. Thank you.